Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Meyerhoff, Executive Director at Wave Hill, and I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual gardeners party. We're really glad you could join us tonight. I know everyone's excited to get on with the event, but I need to thank a few people first. I'll be quick. The Gardeners Party supports horticulture at Wave Hill year-round, and it's organized by our fabulous Friends of Horticulture Committee. This year, they outdid themselves by funding our John Nali Internship for training new gardeners, and we couldn't be more grateful. Special shout out to Fred Landman and Susan Morgenthau for leading that charge. I'd like to thank Wave Hill's Board of Directors for their commitment. Nothing would happen here without their support. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Olmsted, who are also our arborists and have sponsored many gardeners parties past. Thank you, Ken and Michael, for your loyalty. And thank you to our garden champions and to all of you who contributed to tonight's event. If you haven't yet made a contribution, there's still time. And right now, your support means more than ever. So let's get on with the party. It's my pleasure to introduce a woman who puts her heart and soul into everything she does, the chair of our Friends of Horticulture Committee, Donna Raftery.
Thank you, Karen. As many of you know, we've had a few unique gardeners parties over the years, from torrential rainstorms to double rainbows. And tonight is one more unique event. I want to personally thank Wave Hill's Friends of Horticulture Committee, a group of horticulture enthusiasts I'm honored to be a part of. They helped tremendously in putting tonight together and also stepped up early to fully fund the John Nali program for next year. Especially now, it's so important to give new gardeners this hands-on learning and life experience. And thank you to Wave Hill's fabulous gardeners, who this year deserve an extra special shout out as they became part of Wave Hill's essential on-site staff during our closure before welcoming this year's Nali interns in June. Tonight, we are thrilled to bring you a conversation in the garden between Marco Polo Stefano, who became the founding director of horticulture at Wave Hill in 1967, and Louis Bauer, our current director of horticulture, who worked under Marco over 15 years ago. Enjoy their conversation as they share some stories and history that will make your next visit to Wave Hill more insightful and rewarding. Also, have your questions ready for the live Q&A moderated by fellow Friends of Hort member Stephen Orr. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and for supporting Wave Hill.
White phlox with a little pink touch to it.
So wide, really, really wide.
So Marco, this was a private place until 1960. How did it, coming from a private place, help you make a new garden?
Well, I got here in 1967. I can't believe it's that long ago. This garden, for instance, was a rose garden, a very bedraggled rose garden. The only beautiful Norway maple I've ever seen in my life that was out in that lawn, that created some shade, and there was an elm here that shaded the garden. The roses, of course, that don't do very well in summers here anyway, were in terrible shape. The question was what we were going to do with it. First, we called it an old-fashioned flower garden, and then decided people thought we were going to be using old varieties, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to use perhaps newer hybrids, of which you've continued to do over the years. We were trying to keep the feeling of domesticity and that kind of scale.
And in other parts of the garden too, right? Like the wild garden and the aquatic garden.
The entire place, that's how we really approached it. And you, again, have continued to do that.
We have. We try always to keep away from anything that makes it seem institutional or public. And a couple of the newer parts of the garden, like the shade border and the elliptical garden, are kind of repurposed spots.
The elliptical garden, that was a swimming pool. Right. I mean, there was a hole in the ground. We decided to redo it that way and make a formal garden with native plants. You had been here for a number of years. You worked how many years?
9.
9 years. Then you went away to Greenwood and away for 6 years or so?
10.
10.
It flies, it flies.
And then back here. So when you came back and suddenly it was up to you to decide what to do out here, were there things that you had not been able to do because I was mean and didn't let you do them?
Well, it wasn't quite like that I thought about it, but there were some things that when I was a gardener puzzled me. And mostly they came from visitors asking questions about how to get places. So I kind of knew that one of the puzzles I wanted to solve was how to get people connected to the gardens in a way that didn't make them stop and ask questions. I know that it's nice to have some mystery or secret places, but it seemed like some of the paths that had been disrupted or changed were leaving people a little bit lost. My history in design and architecture taught me how to ask the right questions, to work with people. But no, I wasn't thinking that this gladiola shouldn't be here anymore, or that something you planted was all wrong, just making small improvements. So, and I've had a chance to do that with encouragement from our executive director and Friends of Horticulture and others.
Gardening, really good gardening, is about making pictures. And both your background and my background came out of, making pictures. I never made pictures because I couldn't do it, but I could. I wasn't too bad with sculpture, but when I got to plants, it was like, oh, I can do this, because there are no, if you don't like it, you dig it up and put it someplace else until you do like it.
Move it around.
Yeah, right.
Marco, this was a set of derelict greenhouses when you started, right? And
Yep.
It's hard to imagine. I don't think most people would realize that, seeing all of this growing here.
Well, there were 3 greenhouses stepped up, and they were falling apart, broken glass, and looked at them and decided we could do the herb garden in the first place, because people can really touch the plants and smell the leaves. So we did the herb garden, the dry garden, and then the T.H. Everett Alpine Garden up top. So Louis, we've talked a lot about the past here, and I know that there's a great future ahead for Wave Hill. What do you see happening in the future?
We did a little exercise in looking at the gardens and strategizing what might change in the future. One of them was continuing to improve pathways. The wild garden is still a hard spot to reach, and we thought that there might be a way to go around the east side of the flower garden and create an elevated walkway that avoided all the steps required to get up to the wild garden. And it would allow visitors to see not just the wild garden, but the aquatic garden too, which, as you know, rests on the highest point of the property. But there are some easier projects than that one, even though that got a lot of people excited. Things like improving the pathway through the woodland. Visitors have always enjoyed hiking through it, but it has deteriorated some over the years.
Still today, there's a lack of really, really good gardeners. At the beginning, we were very tough on the interns. You may have spent the month of August or July weeding, but that's what gardening is about, and don't want to hear any complaints. So that's what we really wanted to do, is to try to encourage gardening, serious horticulture, plantsmanship, and hands-on gardening. The paths, as you see them today, are as they were. We did not change the configuration of the paths, except one small path on the other side of the garden. But the garden was pretty much, there was no garden up here. What you're seeing today is inspired by the heather garden down at Fort Tryon Park, which overlooks the Hudson and has a similar topography. And we began planting it, and people misunderstood. They thought that we were going to be doing a native plant garden, which we weren't. We were doing an English wild garden, a la William Robinson, using plants from all over the world with a view of how they fit together color-wise and shape-wise. Wow, the thuya here has really done what we intended it to do, and that was to cover up the telephone pole.
It's a great high wall.
And I never thought it was going to get there, but it's almost there, another year or two. And
You just have to wait a few years. Things,
you
they get there.
You have to wait a few years, exactly. In a few years, hopefully quite a few years, neither of us will be here. And what do we hope that future generations and people that are in charge, what do we hope that they're going to keep alive?
Well, all of the plants we put in the ground, of course.
Of course.
The feeling of intimacy of the garden, the idea that this is a residential place and you feel as though you're visiting someone's private garden. Wave Hill should always cultivate a group of gardeners who are interested in the plants first
Absolutely.
and not some latest design fad or fashion. I learned all of that from you. What do you think is important?
Pretty much the same thing. I think that it's so important that people come and see the glory of nature, the beauty of things, the importance of plants into our lives, in our lives, and the wonder of the fact that they grow. As we stand here, I'm looking over here at this holly. That holly was a cutting I took that was that big when I was at New York Botanical Garden as a student. I put it in my mom's garden at the time out in Queens, and my God, look at it. And it's kept, nobody is trimming that, I don't think. They are trimming it.
Are we doing okay?
You're doing great. That looks fabulous. It's even better if I knew that the fact that you're keeping it that way, that plants
and
very
people.
often do need coaxing.
Yeah.
And the human hand, the intervention of the human hand in conjunction with plants can bring them to a new realm of beauty.
So Marco, after all these years, do you still have an idea what you'd like people to leave with when they come here for a visit?
I think it's probably a similar idea or the same what I came with. And that is, life can be beautiful, that the world can be beautiful, and Wave Hill is unique. It really is. It's the people's garden.
Hello, everybody. I'm Stephen Orr. I'm my day job is the editor-in-chief of Better Homes and Gardens, but I've been at a number of other publications as a garden editor, and one of my great joys as a garden editor was getting to know Wave Hill better. I've been on the Friends of Horticulture Committee for about maybe 12, 15 years, I'm not really sure. But even when I first moved to New York City 3 decades ago, Wave Hill was important to me because it was really a refuge of horticulture for a nature-starved Texan who was living in a studio apartment on West 19th Street. So I made frequent visits as much as I could to Wave Hill, and I know so many other people appreciate the garden so much for that. I really love the video that Wave Hill produced that we just watched. It was so great and beautifully done, and so expertly handled by our first 2 guests, actually our only guests, are Marco Polo Stefano and Louis Bauer. So I'm going to chat with. Also, I want to explain that this is a new thing for most of us, and so I'm like my own tech guy, and so I am going to be running this thing tech as well. So Marco and Louis, are you with me? I think you are.
He is.
Hello. Okay, let's do a quick test of everybody.
Hello.
Hello, hello. Okay, it's good to see you both. So everyone in the audience, you can submit questions via your question tab there, and I'll see them here, and we can ask some questions, and then I have some questions just to get us started off. We're going to be doing this for about 20, 25 minutes, and we have some special polls as well that you'll see, and you'll be able to vote on some of these questions, and also a few special celebrity questions that we'll show you as well. So first of all, I just want to ask you both, but I'll start with Marco. I loved that part of the video, Marco, where you were saying that you found that boxwood cutting and you at NYBG, and then you took it to Queens in your mom's house, and then you ended up planting it at Wave Hill when you got that job. I mean, the personal touch on this garden seems to me highly unusual for a public garden. Tell me, Marco, a little bit about how that affects you. Like, how rare is it to have a public garden like this that has the longevity of a personal touch like that?
I think it's probably very, very rare to have that. It was a great opportunity here to be allowed to do that. And it became pretty much the personal touch and the baby of my entire staff. I mean, very much it was always well, I would say, let's do this. And they would say, no, let's do that. And we work it out. But everything was sort of people working together to make one beautiful garden. It is rare. I love when you're in the video and you said, it's growing so beautifully. Did you have to trim that? So Louis, do you trim it?
Not personally, actually. A number of gardeners over the years have been trimming it.
Okay.
For a long time. Christopher Bivens trimmed it recently this year. It's a challenge because it's grown very tall and we still like to keep it pretty narrow.
What was it about that hall? Go ahead, Marco.
I've got to say something. I'm sort of embarrassed because there is no holly that would take that form and get that big. That's an English holly. It would be this big wide thing, and somehow or other I just blanked out. But anyway, it happens.
Maybe you thought you'd found a columnar species.
Right, exactly.
So I love that personal touch. And I think the other thing that hearing in the video was this idea of when you started, you called it the old-fashioned flower garden, and then you realized you didn't really want to do something, period. You wanted to use exciting plants. And for me, that's one of the great things about Wave Hill is it's a garden of plants that that's very almost experimental. So Louis, tell us a little bit about how you keep up with plant varieties and how important it is to try new things for the garden team every year. Like, how much do you try to do new every year? Or is it just kind of as you see interesting things?
I don't get all the credit, of course. The gardeners bring as much interest in new plants as I do. And so they're always pushing to introduce new plants into the garden. Sometimes they do go straight into the garden. Sometimes they go into a test plot or they grow in the behind the scenes areas. And we make sure that they're going to fit into the place where we're imagining. Marco, a long time ago, set up a long, narrow strip that we call the test bed for the particular purpose of growing things to a little bigger size to see when and exactly how they bloom before we put them in the garden. I don't think there are any gardeners on my staff who don't every year have half a dozen new things they want to try out in the garden and in the greenhouse collection.
Where do people find new plants these days? Again, Louis, like how do your gardeners keep up with the world of new plants? Is it something they see in a catalog or is it social media? I just wonder how things have changed there.
I think it's more often in person.
Yeah.
They all get out and see other gardens. And sometimes the new plants are not coming from commerce, although that is a source, of course, but they see them at gardens where we have become friends at Chanticleer and Longwood and NYBG, BBG. We all get around and see other gardens and talk to other gardeners, even if we're not visiting in person, we're talking to other gardeners and seeing their pictures. So it's a whole range of ways we hear about new plants.
Marco, do you remember a plant or any types of plants that you were so excited to find back in the day that you incorporated into Wave Hill that now are very popular or got a little famous, or doesn't even have to be just a Wave Hill type, but anything you thought was, oh, that's amazing, and now it's kind of everywhere?
A number of them, but one of them that stands out in my mind is oh God, here we go with my amnesia. The tall blue thing that
Verbena.
Bonariensis.
That's Louis.
Verbena bonariensis.
Verbena bonariensis.
Yeah.
That we had seen in Christopher Lloyd's garden, Great Dixter, and got seed of it there and brought it here. And we had it for a few years, and people would say, you know, what is that and where can I get it? And you just had to say, well, it's really not available anywhere. And then eventually people took seed from Wave Hill, which was, if they asked us, that's okay. And then years later, some of these same people would come back and say, well, now how do I get rid of it? But because it does seed itself around, but it's a very easy thing to get rid of. So that's one of the things, yes.
I can't imagine why anybody would want to get rid of it. That's my thing. I don't know why anyone would want to do that. But
well, we all have our tastes. Another one is Helichrysum petiolatum, the silvery, furry leaf plant that's very good in containers because it drips over. Back in, you know, you could not get it back then, and now it's all over the place. And I could go on and on. Things have changed so dramatically.
Yeah, I love that verbena, and I think I first saw it at Bryant Park and also the Conservatory Garden. I remember noticing it there for the first time. Well, let's go to a video. As you know, we have a few video questions. One of the video questions comes related to something we all wish we were doing tonight, which was not being on this virtual version of it, but being together under those tents and that beautiful situation above the Hudson. And for one nice thing about doing this event is that people from all over the country or the world could log in and watch this and participate. But one of the bad parts is we all can't be together as a gardening community, which is what we really want to do. one of the highlights of the evening, as we know, is the big live auction. And sometimes it gets so competitive that it gets really, really exciting. So let's go back and hear from one of our most competitive bidders. She'll ask us a question.
Hi, Louis. Hi, Marco. It's very nice to see you tonight. Normally, we'd all be together under the big tent for the garden party at Wave Hill, but it's still awfully nice that we can gather in this fashion during this really difficult time. Wave Hill's Gala party has always been one of my favorite events, which brings me to the question. What was the most expensive plant that was ever auctioned at the Wave Hill auction? I'd love to know, and I'm sure everybody else would too.
So the question was, what is the most expensive plant ever auctioned at Wave Hill? And what was interesting about that question was we have the year. So it was, I think, well, now I've forgotten the year and I don't have it in my notes, but it was probably 10 years ago or more. And it was two plants that I'm going to let Louis describe what they were.
They were two boxwoods, a bigger and a moderate-sized boxwood, and for almost unexplainable reasons, everybody wanted them, which meant there was a lot of competition. The larger went for 70,000 and the smaller for 60,000. Almost enough to say the party was a success with just two items.
It was amazing. I remember that event really well because no one could believe how high everything kept going. And there, you know how it is with an auction when things are going well. So hopefully next year we can be back together auctioning things live. We all want to return to what people are calling the before times, right? There's a question that has come in about chemicals in the garden and organic gardening. How do you, Louis, I'll direct it to you. Louis, how do you balance those ecologies in the garden?
We've always been very careful about chemicals. It's a little hard to run the greenhouses without some help from horticultural oil and soaps to control the insects in that intense environment. We use very little outside, and for all of the time that I've been back at Greenwood, the lawns have been run without any chemicals. We like to see how our visitors enjoy the lawns and roll on the lawns and even go barefoot sometimes. So our lawns look a little weedy sometimes, but we're very conscientious about it. And now I have a plant pathologist as assistant director, Stephen Conaway. So I think our use of chemicals is going to continue to diminish, even though it's always been fairly small.
Right. Let me go to another question here and say, you know, the plant combinations are so artful in how they're arranged in each section of the garden. How do you decide? I know the gardeners rotate. So Marco, maybe I'll start this with you because it's probably a practice that started with you. How do you have gardeners in each section, and how often do you rotate the gardeners and why?
The time I was here, we didn't really have gardeners in each section. People worked in all sections really, but and then might have a slight, spend a little bit more time in one section or another. Now it's Louis that's really brought that to Wave Hill with great success, having separate sections for the gardens. Louis?
Louis, how is that? So how long do people work in one section? For instance, the flower garden.
And I can't say that there is a historic pattern. As Marco said, it was a little more steady and shared a long time ago. And some people have stayed in garden areas for more than a decade. But as new people come onto staff with different talents and interests, or people stay in an area long enough that they think they've tried all the experiments that they see being fruitful, they wonder whether they might find new challenges in a new area. So we have wintertime discussions about what would you do if you could choose a new spot, and we talk about the garden areas and what the requirements are. And out of that come sometimes little changes. Everyone has more than one sort of part of the garden in their specific care. So each gardener has a group of places, and sometimes they trade off one of the smaller places recently we've traded off a couple of the more prominent spots in the garden because staff changed and we needed a new way of sharing the garden responsibilities.
Great.
It has definitely brought a new excitement to the garden each year, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think it must keep it creative so people don't get locked in. Marco, some people are asking about the history of Wave Hill, since some people on the call might not have been able to visit. So tell us, I know it's a big topic, but it's the home of the Perkins family. When you first got there, and we could see in the video, there were some derelict shots of, old greenhouses and things lying around. When you first got there, the garden was not the way it is today. How would you describe your approach to something that was formerly a private estate and how to turn it into a public garden, but still keep that feeling?
I think from the very beginning, we wanted to keep that feeling very much so. It is of a size that people can relate to, if not to the whole thing. It's some 28 acres, so not everyone can relate to that. But each part of the garden, a small part of the garden, they could relate to. And we just started out basically from the greenhouse and then worked what had been a rose garden. We worked it into the flower garden, and then from there, I really forget the chronology of it, but probably up in the wild garden. And I remember there was noxious wild honeysuckle up there, and honeysuckle, and also the petunia, the convolvulus. And we covered areas with plastic. There was no public visitation at that point. And we covered the areas with black plastic to just smother it while we worked on other areas. But it just took on a very organic, pieces just kept being added, and we worked our way out to the periphery.
How does it feel? It's a question I have. I don't know the answer to this, but what is the difference or the definition of a botanical garden, like the New York Botanical Garden or the Brooklyn Botanic Garden? And what's the difference with those gardens and Wave Hill? Louis, what would you say the answer is to that?
There are some big and fairly well-defined differences. Botanic gardens have a scientific component. They have an educational component. Their collections are carefully controlled. They don't allow plants in that came from your mother's garden.
Oops.
But an old estate garden or a pleasure garden is a little more liberal and I think is free to incorporate art and artistic expression in a way that isn't core to the mission of a botanical garden, which usually are bigger institutions too. I think that Marco was always proud of our plant collection and our plant records. For a sort of pleasure garden or estate garden, it did a very outstanding job and probably could compete with some botanical gardens, but we didn't have those other components of science and education about plants.
Go ahead.
It's the difference between the Frick and the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They're two different ways of looking at art.
From an institutional standpoint, I guess there's a giant difference, right?
Right.
On that same note, how do you experiment, since it is a place of experimentation and bringing new plants and finding them and experimenting, how do you take the chance, or how much do you worry about public failure? Or Mark, I'll start with you on that because you've been experimenting with plants for a long time. Did you worry about if something wasn't work out, or are you just able to move it if you need to?
I think we were just out there, and hopefully it would work. And sometimes mid-season, if you saw that it wasn't working, you could sort of modify it and make it work. But we had no choice. We had to do it that way. I think Kew Gardens, they had big areas where they could the year or two before put out all their bedding scheme possibilities and decide what to do, and then eventually get it into the public areas of the garden. We just did it. We were just there.
Yeah, they're doing it live.
Right.
How about you, Louis?
Well, every year there are some little failures. I mean, even if you do things perfectly, Mother Nature brings you a little bit of failure every year, and you have to learn to deal with it. I think one of the things that gives Wave Hill a bit of advantage is that from the beginning we were very good at pot culture. Partly that comes from having so many plants in the collection in the greenhouse, so we can bring them out in the summertime, and they make a great accent in the garden, and they help us cover mistakes once in a while when you just take a plant in a pot and block the view of that thing that isn't working well, or you improvise.
Oh, that's a good tip. Well, always just grab a potted plant and pop it where there's a mistake. That's a good one.
I also think it's
looking now.
important- I also think that it's important that the public see mistakes and
Right.
understand that nothing gets done perfectly. That in their garden, there are going to be mistakes and failures, the things that you don't even have any control over. That's part of it all.
Marco, you had a lot of quotable quotes in the video. Both of you did. Marco, you had one about creating pictures. Like for you, creating gardens is about creating pictures. And both of you have art and design training and all of that. So Marco, tell me how that applies to a home gardener, because I'm not sure everybody thinks that way. Do you kind of flatten it when you see it and kind of look at it as a scene that's how you kind of look at things, is as a group, so you don't get too caught up in the details?
I think it's funny that just I had a friend visit my garden the other day and said, my goodness, this is a small garden, but there seem to be pictures in all these small places. When you take a place, an area, and if you're lucky enough to have some established plants, it's always a nice thing if you can start with what you have established and build around it. Otherwise, you might start with a tree, or you might start with a bigger shrub or whatever, and then just keep adding and adding until you get down to the annuals, if you're using them at all. It's just constantly, not unlike what a painter does, adding and subtracting. In gardening, you could take them away when you don't like them anymore, they fail.
Yeah. I think a lot of home gardeners are afraid to get rid of a living plant. They feel like they're killing it and they're monsters. But I think I always say the path to being a good gardener is lined with dead plants, really, because things don't work out. We had a question from an attendee who wanted to know, are artists allowed to come and paint at Wave Hill, considering there's these amazing pictures? Do people paint there? Do they bring easels or no? Oh yeah. So I think I've seen that too. So yes, people are allowed to come paint there. Do they need any special permission, or do they just show up?
We do hold some programs that encourage watercolors in particular in the garden. So they can sign up for a class.
Cool.
I think people are, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think people can arrive with their sketch pad and perhaps an easel and set up. I can remember sometimes they set up in the wrong places and you had to gently remind them that, get out of the bed and go put your easel over someplace else. But
we have a question here from Ken Olmsted, our sponsor. And as growing zone seems to be increasing in our region, are you thinking about the next 100 years when you're choosing species, about suitability? How do you, I mean, it's a good question with climate change and storms and everything else. How do you choose for the future? I'll give you that, Louis.
It sometimes feels like opportunity. We now have some shrubs growing on the grounds that when I started as a gardener at Wave Hill, we only grew in the cool palm house display for winter interest, things like Edgeworthia and Laura pedalum, shrubs that they grew in the southern mid-Atlantic, but we didn't think we could grow outdoors here. And now it seems fairly commonplace to have them out of doors. I know that climate change is not all to our advantage, of course. We worry about the trees that we're losing, like sugar maples, because they're not keeping up with the warming climate. But at the other end of the scale, we're growing things from further south that we couldn't but had admired in the past. So it is something that we think about. It's not always entirely depressing, but it certainly has a warning side, especially with storms.
Right. I remember when I moved to New York City, I didn't see crepe myrtles and I didn't think they could grow here. And when I was from Texas, of course, we had them all over the place. So when I started to see the crepe myrtles popping up, and we have some giant ones in front of my building here in Queens. So that's, they weren't around 30 years ago, right? Crepe
right.
They were not.
Another good.
And there has been some breeding on that, maybe for hardiness, but I don't think all of these are the hardy versions.
No, a lot of them were introduced by the National Arboretum in Washington. They did a great deal of work and introduced some very good ones, and a couple that were more hardy that were probably the first to come to the New York City area. We have a great one in front of Wave Hill House near Armour Halls. That is just glorious, and it's been there a long time. Marco planted it.
Let's go to go ahead, Marco.
Well, that particular plant is really great for its bark. The flowers are white and sort of pale, not very impressive, but the bark is fantastic. The other thing you see now quite commonly and is available in nurseries, in fact, I've seen it available in Home Depots, is the wonderful evergreen southern magnolia. That was definitely a no-no when, 30, 40 years ago. And now it's grown everywhere.
I've forgotten about that. So we have another video question from one of our special gardener friends. So let's launch that video question.
Hi, Marco. Hi, Louis. The question I want to ask is, when you get out of bed in the morning, what gets you tingling when you're thinking about the day ahead?
He said, what gets you tingling when, tingly or tingling? I'm not sure. He said, when you're getting out of bed in the morning, when you're thinking about the garden. That is Fergus Garrett, the legendary gardener from Great Dixter. If anyone has ever been to Great Dixter, they'll see some similarities between Great Dixter and Wave Hill as far as plantsmanship goes. So let's start with Mark. I'm gonna start with Louis. Louis, tell us about that question. It's a very broad question, so you can answer it however you like, evidently.
Well, maybe I'm slow to wake up some days, but definitely get the tingling sensation when I walk into work every day and see the Palisades and the river in the view. I mean, it's incomparable. It just puts you in another world. And from there, it's easy to walk around. And I think when I first got to know the garden, it was all about which seeds were germinating and which things were coming up. But now I walk around and when I arrive in the morning and see what each of the gardeners is doing and how the progress in each garden area grows every day. And that's what does it for me.
The sense of scale and looking over the river to the Palisades and the boats going, you can't beat that. And that's why it's called Wave Hill, right? Is that true? Right. That's an urban legend. That's about waving from the hill, I think. Is that right?
Or the shape of the hill as waves.
Oh, it's a wave. Okay, I got that wrong. I'm glad I said that. I've been carrying that around as misinformation for a while.
There are various opinions.
Various opinions. Okay, so there's two. Okay, that sounds right. So Marco, what about you?
Moment, I get up and I go outside immediately to see if there are any figs ripe yet that I could have for breakfast. But on a regular morning, and I must say, the garden has been my salvation through this period of time, this awful time, and get up every morning and it's like, okay, what are you going to do in the garden today? And it used to be that way at Wave Hill. It was exciting, no matter what well, I don't know about how exciting it was in snowfall in the wintertime, but when it all had to be cleaned up. But otherwise, to have the sort of the pleasure of no interruption of a whole day of weeding is great, that kind of thing. And concentrating. I think my garden is better than it ever has been because I've been there every single day for hours and hours and hours. Lots of tingles.
Oh, good. I mean, that's what growing plants is all about. Well, we have another little feature with this party is to do a poll to test people who know the garden. We're going to pop up a poll here. Let's see if it shows up. So that's about the John Nali internship program, which we'll talk about right after this. So for those of you who know the internship program, which is what this party is all about, this party raises funds for the gardeners in the intern program. How many Nali interns has Wave Hill had since the start of the program? Is it A, 65, B, over 100, C, 22, or 43D? So you can just, if you want to participate, just vote on your screen and we'll show that in a bit. And tell us a little bit about the history of the Nali internship program. Who is it named after and when did it begin, Marco?
Well, it began, I'm not sure the exact date, and I'm sure that is available, but it was quite a few years ago. And we needed extra help in the garden and also realized that there was a real lack of trained gardeners who had knowledge of plants. And so the hands-on, gardeners, really good gardeners. There were people coming out of universities with degrees, but I always call them the sort of the carriers of notebooks and et cetera, et cetera. No, this was to try to train people who were down and dirty and getting things done and understanding the needs of different plants. So we started with a few and it just built to what for all these years. It's been very successful. any number of people have gone on to good careers in the field.
The answer is, there it is, over 100. So you guys did great. 63% of you got the answer correctly. So you can have a drink. I don't really have a gift for you or a prize, but hopefully you have a glass of wine or a cocktail. I think there was a signature cocktail in the invitation as well. So I have a glass of wine here waiting for me after this, but with all this tech, there's no way I'm drinking. I did have a drop. Louis saw me have a drop of wine. Well, let's go to another question here. Let's see. Well, let's talk about design a little bit. Louis, tell us a little bit about, you said in the video about you were concerned or thinking about accessibility and how people move through the garden, and there were some connections to you that seemed off. What have you been working on in the past few years, and what's in the future to work on those questions about how people move through the garden, both for differently abled people and for just everyday visitors who are strolling around?
Well, in the video, you heard Marco say that the pathways hadn't been changed, and that's true in each of the garden areas. But some of the connections between garden areas, between the flower garden and the wild garden, between the shade border and the conifer slope, there in some places was really, you were a bit at a loss to see a connection. And as I also suggested, I didn't want to make a sort of highway where there was a one way only, but just a little more intuitive pathway to connect those places. One thing that we did that was easy was to connect the conifer slope to the shade border by extending the path that was already there down to the conifer slope area. The connection between the herb, dry and alpine gardens that made in the old greenhouses connects to the wild garden and the aquatic garden by a little connector that has the gold border and now the curl and overlook, a set of steps. When I came, they had been kind of overgrown and almost obscured, so we kind of reinstated that little connection. So small changes, but I think those intuitive connections between the gardens that help people get around without thinking about which way I should go make the visit a little more pleasant.
What's on the horizon that's exciting as far as new areas or design features? Anything you're trying to raise money for? We'll be hearing about soon.
Well, finally, work is happening again on our front entrance and parking lot. That it is not a big dramatic change in the parking area, but in the way people enter the garden, there is a big change. And even though the actual building part of it is funded, I still have a lot of plants to install. So a good bit of my budget will be directed to that over the next few months because the pandemic put it on hold. But now they're moving ahead again, and I have fingers crossed that it won't be too cold when they finish for me to get plants in there. And my assistant director, Steve Conaway, has been documenting the paths in the woodland, which we mentioned in the video. They looked really great 20-some years ago, but are due for more attention.
Marco, we have a question from a viewer. What is your favorite place at Wave Hill? And you can't say everywhere. That's what this person said.
Almost everywhere. Oh dear, that's a tough one. I think maybe the summer house up in the wild garden, to sit there and to look down across the garden and then long views still to the river, although it's getting a little bit dense and it's getting harder to see. And then it's very satisfying to me.
Yeah, it's a beautiful spot, and you can see the river. It's a great shot of all that. Well, it's related, kind of a related question. You know, Thomas Jefferson famously said, "I am an old man, but a young gardener," and I'm not aiming that at any of us. But if we're old men and young gardeners, what do you both still want to learn about, or what is something that you find something that you want to investigate more in gardening? Do you have an area of all that? Louis, you go first.
Well, despite what I said about the latest trends in gardening and not following fads, the sort of recent trend to sort of habitat gardens and matrix gardens is interesting, and it's a new way of thinking about using perennials from the way I learned over many years. And maybe I'm late to come to it, but it's interesting, and I experiment a little at home in my own garden and see what happens if I plant in that fashion with calyxes and native grasses mixed with my perennials more than I have in the past. So I'm still learning, and you know, there are way too many plants for someone to learn in a lifetime. So there's always a few new things, and they're not just the latest patented hybrids. They're plants that are, you know, from the wild that we haven't really explored.
I mean, that's what I love about it. You're never done, right? You never can be done. What about you, Marco?
I think that I don't know if I can answer that question directly, but I certainly am shocked by how little I know and how much there is to still learn about things, and also to relearn things that you've forgotten, certainly plant names with me. But it's just never-ending learning process because there is so much, and it's great. It's fun to do.
It's fun to do, and especially these days with craziness in the world of every place you turn, it's just more nutty than I've ever experienced in all my 28 years. Just joking. Is that when you're gardening, you can't really do other things, which I love. You know, your phone, if you know, your hands are dirty, you're muddy, your phone might be in your pocket, but it might be inside. And so it's a really nice distance to get off the kind of hamster wheel of social media and all of those things that are causing us so much trouble. We have a question here from Barbara Paul Robinson. Hi, Barbara. Hope you're doing great. She's a former honoree of the party, and she wants to know, Wave Hill can grow its own plants, but how do you see the impact of the loss of some of the really great specialty nurseries to both yourself and the gardening public? Like, how are we dealing with this kind of loss of these mom and pops and these other, you know, places that have been going for so many years just because the business is so challenging? Let's go to, I'll do Louis first because Marco, I think might be Louis first. I think you let me know, Marco, if you want to answer it, but let's go to Louis.
Well, I don't really, I mean, I understand the problem, and I have spoken about it to others. I'm not sure what we can do. As I said, we often trade plants with other gardeners, but that doesn't help home gardeners necessarily, except that I think maybe we'll see a new resurgence of plant societies. We have always participated in some seed exchanges, and other plant societies exchange plants once or twice a year. So it's possible that all of these people who have been gardening up a frenzy during the pandemic will also sign up for some of the societies and groups, and plant exchanges will help to replace some of the little specialty nurseries. A few of them are going to survive, of course, and we should patronize them. But that might be a way that we see some new plants come to our gardens.
I noticed at Meredith, a company that publishes Better Homes and Gardens, they have a big research group. And I've been listening to research lately about COVID and how it's changing people's habits. And the gardening thing is through the roof. So I think we can all raise a glass to the fact that a good benefit of the pandemic is that people are really interested in gardening. I think both because it's soul nurturing and also they're at home, they have more time. They're working from home, they're not so busy running around. So people are really tapping into it. So I hope that lasts. Marco, did you want to answer that question?
I think small mail order nurseries, of which there are quite a few, and I keep discovering more, are a great place to go and get them by mail. The other thing is I've just recently, I'm new to this all, I'm not on Facebook, et cetera, but I've recently come
don't get on Facebook. Just don't.
Various societies and groups on Facebook. And the other day I spent probably 25 minutes looking at people who are in the Colchicum fall blooming crocus groups. It's amazing, absolutely amazing.
Is it all around the world?
That I've never heard of and never seen. And there are people out there collecting them. And there are actually some people here in the New York area that are doing this. And each plant seems to have its own group of really avid supporters. We all know about the snowdrop people.
Yeah, the snowdrop people, and also the Colchicum people, I would imagine they're similar because I have a hard time telling some of those apart, and I'm sure if you're an enthusiast, you would educate me greatly on all the different versions of those. We have a question here for you, Marco, and you might need to stop and think. If you need to, we can ask another one. What is your favorite tree at Wave Hill, and one that you're proud to have planted? And part two, why is that? Can you answer that, or do you need to think a while?
Well, to narrow it down to one would be difficult, but the one that comes to mind is right outside Glendor here, which is a big white oak that was planted, how many years ago? It's got to be 30 years ago about, when we put it in. And I remember I planted it one night after work with Mr. Nali, with John, and it was about 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. Well, maybe not, maybe it was 4 feet tall. It was a whip, there was nothing. And I remember thinking, well, I'm never going to see the great glory of white oaks, in that they make these enormously thick trunks and then send out these limbs parallel to the ground that are as big in circumference as the trunk. And it's always like, how do you do that? How do you cantilever something out that far? Well, indeed, it's beginning to happen. That tree is looking really, really great. And as I say, there are other trees here, but that's one that comes to mind.
Do you have one, Louis, a favorite tree, either that you planted or not?
I haven't planted any as grand as the white oak. It is a little tough. I thought we were leaving that with Marco, so my wheels were just.
Oh, don't worry. Well, let's move on. I'll say mine. I like those. I've forgotten the name. The one with the red berry. Not Idesia.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Idesia.
Yes.
Okay. Idesia. Is it a trio of trees near the Glendor? Is it near Glendor House?
Near Wave Hill House, planted in Frank Cabot's honor.
Can we do another poll, Eka? I like the poll about the famous person. Can we do that one? I don't want to mess things up. I feel a little bit like I'm throwing them for a loop, because we're all experimenting, folks. Okay, while they find a poll, we have a question here from Jessica. She wants to know about native plants. So what is the philosophy about, and it kind of taps into what you're saying, Louis. So let's give it to you, since it's about what you're doing now. What is the philosophy, or what's the practice of native plants versus other things at Wave Hill? Because I know it's not a native plant garden specifically.
And we're not quite as organized as a botanical garden with having a philosophy for every subject, but I think there have always been native plants in every part of the garden. We certainly never excluded them and have always appreciated a number of them. I think as time goes on, we appreciate more of them. And as we heard just earlier, Marco made a small formal garden strictly with natives, and our practice has always been to use natives only as we get close to the woodland areas of Wave Hill. I don't think that we have had a particular drive to change that perspective on natives much. We have talked recently about the bit of meadow or meadow area, as we call it, not really what a Midwesterner would call a meadow, but enlarging that, making it a little better. I think that's what I would say.
I live and work in Iowa without the pandemic, and I can tell you there's so little prairie in Iowa. I know there's some you can visit, but it's all corn and soybeans. So, but yeah, prairie plants are very important. We have a question here. Maybe this is another one for you, Louis, and then we'll get one from Marco. Can you speak a little bit about how you've opened up the garden to urban youngsters and the community? How does the community, and particularly children, interact with the garden at Wave Hill in normal times? Maybe COVID has changed that, but in normal times.
Well, it's a function that is a little bit outside of my purview and the gardeners. Certainly we interact with children who are visitors and young people who are visitors, as we do with all the visitors. But our education department brings thousands of students to the garden every year. And often they specifically ask to interact with the gardeners, and we enjoy it. Just like the intern program, if we don't capture young people's interest and fascination with plants, we won't have good gardeners in the future. But it is an area that we collaborate on with our educators at Wave Hill, and And
Another thing is the art project has been going on for years and years and years, where families come with their kids and they're guided through, well, they're guided through, there's a subject that they do on, making flowers, or I can remember a bed that we did years ago when we didn't have the funds to buy tulip bulbs. And so the family art project decided what they were going to do is make paper tulip bulbs, and we filled the bed with those, and it was great. And they lasted quite a long time. They might not have been paper, I don't know, but no, it's a great program, and it's gone on for years and years and years.
Go ahead.
Another year they made sandcast footprints and pebbles and other natural things to make a path through that same bed.
Oh, that's really nice. I just love, I grew up gardening very early, and so I just think it's so nice to connect kids and plants. Well, we have, I think, Eka, can we do the poll now? We have a poll. When Mark Twain lived in Wave Hill House, he was fond of working remotely, something many of us have become accustomed to do recently. From where did Mark Twain do his work? Was it A, the Riverdale Yacht Club, B, the Ice House, C, up in a tree, or D, the Kate French Terrace? Now, Kate French was not alive during Mark Twain's time, so it must have had another name then. If Kate French, if you're on the call, I hope I'm not insulting you. That was not meant to be a dig or anything. Kate was one of the, when I first started coming to the garden, Kate was the director. So hopefully she might be here, I don't know. But anyway, when I saw that, I was like, well, that didn't exist when Mark Twain was there. So put in your answers there. The garden also, Marco, maybe you'll answer this. Who are some of the other famous people associated with this home when the Perkins owned it?
Oh dear. Well, I think
I have one in my head, but.
Well, for me, the most important thing is when the Perkins owned the Wave Hill House, actually it was before them, that the decorating firm of Associated American Artists, which was partially the main partner was Louis Comfort Tiffany, and they actually did the interior of what was the library. It's all taken out now, but some of it actually, we had put parts of it up to auction because they were just must be down in the basement, and it's ended up anyway. It has ended up in the Yale Art Museum.
Wow.
And it's the teak arches that divided the main room, what is now the library.
What about Toscanini?
Of course, Toscanini lived here for a time, yes, and he liked the area so much that he built his own house a few blocks north of here, that's also gone right now.
I didn't know that. So he loved Riverdale, Toscanini.
Yeah, he hated the Armor Hall, however. He would not, there was word, the help knew that they were never supposed to leave those doors open because he wanted nothing to do with the armor, which was still housed there at that, because he was just renting. And the collection had not gone, it's now down at the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
That's a classy renter. So we have so here we have the answer. The winner is, and you got this as well, up in a tree. So he liked to work up in a tree, which sounds really nice. I love this. I wish we had a photograph of that, of Mark Twain working up in a tree. I don't know how he got up and down, maybe a ladder or I don't know. We have two questions here that are related. One from Kathy, who's a friend of horticulture, and Jody. One is, besides Boltonia, John Nali's lime dots, which is the cultivar name, is there another plant unique to Wave Hill that comes to mind? That's number one. For you, Marco, maybe. And then for you, Louis, secondarily from Jody is there still a jade vine in the tropical house? And we can describe what a jade vine is because they're very special. So Marco, why don't you answer about any things that are there plants that are actually really specific to Wave Hill, like that plant that bears names?
Well, the only plant that we really named, and actually is out in commerce now, I recently visited 2 nurseries and there it was for sale, is Boltonia, which is a plant that George Washington actually grew, and usually it's a daisy-like plant with white petals and a yellow center. And one occurred down in the back border along the back road here, which is apetalous, and it's just these lime dots. And John actually, here it is, as a matter of fact, Louis had placed it behind me as part of the decor.
Did Kathy know that? How
We
did she
saw
know
that and we named it Nali's Lime Dots, and it's really prized by flower arrangers because it's really great to put in with other things. It's these airy little lime dots.
They're beautiful, and it doesn't look like a normal Boltonia, which is real daisy-like.
Oh, it is. It gets to be about 7 feet tall and flop.
Wow. They're very tall. What about the Jade
You have to
Vine?
be careful about trussing it up.
Right.
Jade Vine has become quite big in the tropical house. Strongyloden is its genus, and it is one of a couple of plants that we grow in the greenhouses that has truly turquoise colored flowers. And the Strongylodens are a big, long, dangling cluster of flowers that look a little like wisteria, except the flower shapes are sort of parrot beak, 2 shades of turquoise. The other flower is Ixia viridiflora that has a flower in that color from our South African bulb collection.
It's a very strange color. It's like so aqua it looks fake, right? The only one. What'd you say?
They both elicit the same praise from the general public, and that is, oh my God, it's so beautiful. It looks like plastic.
Looks fantastic. The other one I can think of that I've only seen in California, like at the Berkeley Botanic Garden, is Puya. That Puya. That's
Oh God,
Yes.
gorgeous plant.
yeah.
Harder for us to grow because it just needs a little more space than we can afford in our little greenhouses.
Yeah, it's pretty large. Well, we're going to have time for one more question. I think I want to ask you both, since this is a garden for the community, for the city, for the world, really. But when visitors come, what do you like seeing people do in the garden? Like, how is it that you know that they're getting it? Why don't you go first, Marco?
I think Louis is going the same thing. Our favorite type of visitor is a person that carries around a notebook and is always writing things down or taking little sketches of things. But I love the people who come and just sit and enjoy the
We lost Marco, I think. All right, Marco was taken from us for a second here. Okay, maybe he'll be back. But Louis, why don't you finish? And we made it.
The finish to that thought was that they're doing what Marco said in the video. They're appreciating the beauty of plants and the specialness of this spot, purely and simply,
Yeah.
without sort of weighing it down with learning plant names or thinking about anything deeper than that.
Well, it is a garden for just general enjoyment and just being outside. And especially these days, I think after all the lockdown that we had, being out in a garden was really a balm for everybody around New York City, especially. And these days, of course, everyone is gathering. The new social scene is to gather in a park and have a picnic or sit with your friends and talk, because it's socially distanced and it's outside. So I see so many people using the parks and the city's green spaces so much more. So that's great. And also Wave Hill is open. It's open to visitors. Do you have to pre-register, Louis, or is it just right now it's not that?
We do ask our visitors now to pre-register because we have a capacity limit. It increased recently, so it feels pretty generous, and I don't think that they're turning people away. But as the fall comes on and some of the gardens look their best in the fall, it's a smart thing to make your reservation a little ahead. They're not timed reservations, they're good for the day.
Okay, that's good to know. And also, as anyone who hasn't been to Wave Hill before, who's on this, Wave Hill is a garden that's gorgeous all the time, but really it does reach a crescendo in September, and October's amazing too. So anyway, Louis, here I am knocking everything away on our last moments, and hopefully Marco's where he can hear us, but why don't we go to you, Louis, and let's wrap things up.
All right. I guess mostly I want to thank you all for joining us this evening. We're so grateful for you sharing your time with us. Thank you once again to Olmsted for their continued support. Olmsted is Wave Hill's arborist and provides expert care of our specimen trees and shrubs. Thank you to Stephen for juggling the technology and 2 unpredictable old guys. And thank you, Marco, for being here. And I'm expecting that he'll hang around a little, even though he disappeared from the screen. Wave Hill is open. Fall is especially beautiful. We hope you schedule time to visit. And in addition to the gardens, we have exhibitions from a Friends of Horticulture member Francis Palmer in Wave Hill House, and the Society of Botanical Arts exhibition now on view in Glyndor Gallery. So plants inside and out. Thank you all.
So thank you so much, Marco and Louie. And Marco, I'm sure you can hear this maybe wherever you are because they're both at Wave Hill right now. And I just want to reinforce that this event raises funds to support the gardeners. And if you'd like to donate, just go to wavehill.org/support and please donate, because all that money goes to help the new projects, but also the needs of the garden team and the interns. This video will be recorded and on the website if anyone wants to send it to a friend. And also there's a horticultural series that we always love that starts up in January. And that will be virtual as well, I think, this year, but it'll be great for us to gather. You know, the next best thing to being together is being able to virtually be together and learn about plants. You're going to get a special gift via email from Marco and Louie, which is really exciting, which is a plant list of some of their favorites. So for people who we didn't get to your question, you had questions about some of their favorite plants that you can grow, this plant list from Marco and Louie will be heading your way. And then finally, I just want to say, we're doing this for the gardeners and the interns at Wave Hill. So please join me to raise a glass to salute the gardeners and Nali interns at Wave Hill who make the place so beautiful. And thank you so much to everybody who joined us. I hope you had an okay time. I watched Christian Amanpour last night to see how you can do this. I don't think I'm as good as she is. But anyway, let's have a glass of wine. And hopefully maybe some of you are even gathered together and having dinner or something. And hopefully we'll get back to normal and be under that beautiful tent soon. Cheers to everybody.